You're coming with me. A mysterious gunslinger found stranger bleeding by the stagecoach stop, and dust shimmered over the stagecoach road like a veil of restless spirits, blurring the line where earth surrendered to sky. Noon light hammered the barren mesas, and even the iron nails in the abandoned hitching posts sighed with heat. Along that bleached track a single wheel lay overturned, spokes cracked, its axle groaning whenever the wind dared move it. All else was hush, the sort that settles on a place that has already witnessed too much and now pretends it remembers nothing. From the southern horizon a rider emerged, horse and man stretched thin by distance until both seemed made of mirage. Each hoof-fall sent up a red plume that clung to their shadows before drifting away like smoke from a fading campfire. The rider wore a coat the color of worn parchment, edges darkened by storms long past. Beneath the tilted brim his eyes remained hidden, but something about the way he sat the saddle, straight as fenced cedar, weary as winter, told the desert that he had ridden far without claiming rest. A man might read mercy in that posture or menace, depending on how many sins he carried in his pockets. He reined in at the quietest of sounds, a shuddering breath, wet and shallow, slipping through the dust. At the base of a scrub oak a figure lay twisted, half concealed by tall dry grass. The green dress was torn at the hem and stained dark where crimson had soaked through. A hand, small and calloused, pressed against the wound yet could not stem its slow confession. Her face, freckles dusted like pollen across pale skin, turned toward the harsh light as if searching for one last constellation to map before surrendering. She blinked but saw little. Heat waves folded the world in and out of focus, and the rider's shape became to her a flickering candle stuck between dreams. He dismounted without hurry, boots settling into the red sand with the resigned sigh of someone who has approached too many final scenes. Kneeling, he spoke not a word. Instead, he pressed the back of his gloved fingers to her cheek, measuring fever against the smoldering air. The woman's lashes fluttered like moth wings, and her cracked lips parted in a ghost of speech. No plea, only coordinates, numbers limping across her tongue, before dissolving into silence. The rider gathered that whisper arithmetic into his memory, as though it might one day buy her life back from whatever debt collector waited beyond the horizon. A quick survey revealed a story written in grit and blood. Stagecoach tracks swerving, another set of hoof prints cutting them off, scattered shell casings gleaming like discarded coins. One bullet had found her just below the ribs and burrowed deep. He could feel its heat throbbing under her palm. She had tied a strip of cotton around herself. Clever tourniquet, but the cloth had soaked beyond saving. All the while the wheel complained behind him, spinning minutely in the wind, a compass with no needle. The rider weighed distance versus bleeding, desert versus daylight. No settlement lay closer than his own solitary cabin north along the dry wash, and turning south toward town would invite the sheriff's deputy, a young man proud of his badge yet hungrier for reward posters. The fallen woman wore no wanted name, but rumor traveled faster than any bullet, especially rumors pinned to women found wounded and silent. The rider decided, though the choice had been made days ago, maybe years. Each time he told himself he would stop picking up broken things and still could not ride past them. He slipped one arm beneath her shoulders, the other under her knees, bones light as bird wings yet trembling with stubborn life. As he lifted, a soft groan left her chest, not of pain alone but of relinquishing the ground's hard embrace. The rider spoke then, voice roughened by too many fireside nights spent arguing with ghosts. "You're coming with me." No more words. The sentence settled over them like shade. He laid her across his horse's withers, cinched a blanket round her to keep sun and wind from greedy fingers, then swung into the saddle behind, cradling her weight against his torso. The mare, sensing urgency, shifted restlessly until his hand found her mane and steadied the storm pulsing beneath skin and leather. They moved out at a measured trot, following the road only long enough to reach a narrow arroyo that curved north. Along its cracked bed, thorn bushes clawed at passing legs, but the rider chose this harsh channel for the cover it offered from distant eyes. Overhead a hawk circled, shadows sliding across them like a warning sundial. She stirred when talons cut a sharp cry from the blue, and he leaned forward to let words glide into her ear, low as lullabies. Rest. Day is still long. Whether she heard or not, her breath obeyed. Each exhale cooled upon his coat sleeve, a fragile promise that the next inhale might yet arrive. Blood seeped, but slower now. He felt its warmth spreading beneath bandage and blanket, marking his chest with a stain that would not wash out easily, evidence to be explained should any stranger halt him come dusk. Hours trickled, sticky and golden. Canyon walls leaned close, granting occasional shade where purple wildflowers fought for life among stones. In these dim pockets he halted, poured a measure of water between her lips, changed the dressing with torn linen from his own shirt. Every motion was deliberate, each knot tied with the quiet devotion of a man trying to bind not just flesh but fate itself. When the sun bent lower, the arroyo widened into a wash scattered with cedar stumps long since fell for rail ties. Here the rider paused atop a ridge. Behind him the world he knew, a solitary cabin beyond a line of pines, lay merely half a mile farther, yet he lingered. Perhaps he feared the moment's shelter would reveal more than safety. Questions asked by lamplight neither could answer. Yet still she bled, though less freely, and dawn was too far away to risk another mile unspent. He urged the mare forward. As they crossed a final stretch of sand strewn with bleached bones of cattle, he felt the woman's heartbeat quicken, fluttering against his ribs like a caged wren sensing open sky. Her eyes flicked open, clear shards of riverstone meeting his gaze for the first time. Words stumbled from her mouth, stripped of strength yet edged with determination. Map, pocket, protected. He steadied her shoulders. With careful fingers he searched the torn green dress until he found a small oilskin pouch sewn into the lining. Inside lay a folded parchment, stiff with dry blood at one corner. He slipped it into the inner pocket of his coat without unfolding the secret inside. Her head fell back against him, but her pulse steadied as if knowing her burden had been shared. West wind carried the first scent of his pine cabin, resin and river mud, memory of rains. Smoke did not yet curl from its chimney, for he had left before dawn, intending only to check water levels at the distant crossing. Instead, he returned with a stranger bleeding against his heartbeat and a map pressed to his ribs. At the threshold he dismounted, arms growing leaden from hours of cradle. The mare snorted relief, shaking dust from her mane. Inside, cabin shadows laid themselves like quilts over rough-hewn furniture. He lit a single lamp, wick coughing before steadying into amber glow. On the narrow bed, he placed her gently, cutting away cloth around the wound. By lamp fire he cleaned and stitched with thread boiled in whiskey, each passive needle another vow his trembling hands would never speak aloud. Through it all her eyes tracked him, lucid yet trusting, as though she saw not the scar along his jaw but the trembling beneath his stoic armor. While bandages settled, he searched shelves for willow bark and a little tin of laudanum left over from last winter's fever. He poured only a few drops onto her tongue, enough to dull the blade without stealing her to unreachable distances. Then he brewed coffee thick enough to drag the horizon closer and sipped the first scalding mouthful beside her, letting steam curl round his features like forgiving smoke. Night gathered at the windows, glass panes reflecting lamplight, so that cabin walls seemed to float inside a larger darkness. Coyotes began their choir, distant at first, then nearer, though none dared cross the boundary of pine pitch smoldering in the fire pit outside. He checked her pulse again, steadier now, and allowed his shoulders to slump for the first time that day. Perhaps he closed his eyes, perhaps he only dreamed them closed. Either way, when they opened, she was looking at him. Her whisper arrived barely above breath, yet in the hush it seemed loud as church bell. "Thank you, Ryder." He considered answering, but words felt clumsy under so clean a gratitude. Instead, he poured a second cup, set it cooling on the bedside crate. She smiled faintly, eyelids fluttering like pages in a wind. Sleep claimed her mid-sigh, shoulders easing against the pillows thinned down. The rider stepped outside. Stars had gathered in legions overhead, stitched across indigo cloth. He listened. Only wind through needles, whippoor will lament, the small pop of pitch in the dying fire. Yet beneath those familiar sounds prowled another, distant and deliberate. Hoofbeats on packed earth, too many for stray cattle, too slow for wild mustang, suspension held between caution and pursuit. The rider's hand brushed the grip of his revolver, fingers lingering as though greeting an old regret. He let the night fold around him, cloak of silence stitched with vigilance. Inside, the stranger breathed in even rhythm. Map hidden safe, blood quiet for now. Somewhere beyond the trees a deputy polished his star, sharpening questions that always end in iron bracelets. The road behind already hungered to swallow its secrets, and dawn would drag them all into harsher light. The rider inhaled pine and dust, a scent that tasted like both memory and promise. Then he stepped back through the doorway, drawing the night's hush inside with him so it might guard her dreams. Lamplight flickered, welcoming him as if certain that within its gold glow the world could be held at bay until morning. For the briefest breath he allowed himself to believe it, closing the door on the dark beyond. Letting the latch settle with a sound that felt almost like hope. The morning broke slow and shy, like a child creeping to the door of a quiet room. Pale light sifted the gaps in the log walls, brushing over a tin basin, a worn coat slung over a chair, and the stranger sleeping under a quilt of faded star patterns. The cabin held its breath, steeped in the hush of pine wood, creek silt, and the faintest scent of blood dried into cotton. She stirred before the sun had fully risen. No sound came at first, only the subtle shift of limbs adjusting to pain, and the brief flutter of her eyes adjusting to this unfamiliar world. A world with cedar beams above her head instead of sky. Her breath hitched. One hand moved to her side, fingers trembling as they grazed a thick bandage in the dull throb beneath it. In the corner, beside the stove where a pot of coffee sat dark and still, he watched, not from hiding, just from silence. His name wasn't one she had asked for, nor one he had given. His kind had long since stopped offering names to people who might not stay. He had let his actions speak instead, wordless offerings of care. A stitch here, a cooling cloth there, the pulse of water against parched lips. He had kept his distance and kept her warm, both at once. She met his eyes across the quiet. Hers were clear now, though framed with exhaustion, and behind them something steady flickered. Not fear, not quite trust, either, but recognition maybe, the look of someone who'd learned long ago how to measure a man by what he didn't say. She tried to rise. He crossed the room in 2 strides, reaching a hand to stop her. She shook her head. "I can sit," she whispered. He did not argue, only slid a pillow behind her and eased her upright. Her jaw tightened with the movement, but she didn't cry out. Once settled, she let her gaze sweep the cabin. The room was modest as expected. A single cot, 1 window, a chipped wash basin, a small table littered with tins, and a book with no cover. But it was clean, lived in but not abandoned. It spoke of someone who'd chosen solitude, not been chased into it. Her voice came soft, like wind threading through pine needles. "Where am I?" "North of the arroyo," he said, pouring a mug of coffee. "Cabin's mine." She nodded, more to herself than to him. "How long?" "You slept the night. Fever was high. You're lucky it broke." A pause. Then, "You rode me here. I wasn't going to leave you bleeding in the dust." "I suppose not." She reached for the coffee. He passed it to her, waiting to see if her hands would hold steady. They did, barely. She took a sip and winced. Strong enough to peel paint. He didn't smile, but something softened in his posture. She cradled the mug in her lap and looked down into its surface like it might show her a way forward. "You don't know who I am," she said. "No. Don't want to know? I figure you'll tell me when you're ready." She glanced up then, eyes narrowing slightly, testing him like a thread through a needle. Most men aren't that patient. "I'm not most men." She nodded again, lips pressed into a line. She didn't give her name, not yet. Instead, she reached with one hand to touch her side, where the pain still pulsed in dull waves. "Bullet passed through," he said. "Clean. No infection." Her voice dropped. "They wanted the map." He waited. "I wouldn't give it. So they shot me and left me there." He nodded once, slow and sure, accepting this without pressing for more. She noticed how still he could be, like a tree that had grown deep roots to keep from being moved. "They think I'm dead," she added, voice a little stronger now. "That gives us a head start." He met her gaze. "Who's they?" "Landmen. Railroad surveyors dressed like bounty hunters. They've been buying up everything from here to river, and don't care who they bury to do it. They knew my father was a cartographer, thought he marked a fresh water line, a hidden spring beneath bedrock, rich enough to shift power. He did. Her silence was answer enough. He let the weight of that truth settle. Outside, a crow cawed once, cutting across the hush. "Map's safe," he said. "You asked me to protect it." She looked surprised. "You didn't think I'd remember?" I didn't know if I'd even spoken. He moved to the shelf and retrieved the folded parchment, still wrapped in its oilskin, tucked between a pair of dry gloves. He placed it gently on the bedside crate. "You haven't read it?" I figured it wasn't mine to read. She stared at the map, and something like grief passed through her eyes. Not fresh, but worn, like a garment long carried. My father died for it, in a flash flood when we were charting territory down south. He kept this with him, protected it even as the river tried to take everything else. Her fingers hovered over the oilskin, but didn't touch it. He called it the river under rock, said it could give water to towns that haven't tasted a drop in years. But he never got to prove it, and you were trying to finish what he started. Her chin lifted, and for the first time he saw the fight in her, not a loud defiance, a quiet, relentless endurance. "Someone had to," she said. He leaned against the doorframe, folding his arms. "There's a deputy in town who'll be asking after a wounded woman by tonight. Word gets around. If they find you here." She didn't flinch. "You can turn me in if you want." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at the window, where pine branches waved like slow hands in morning light. "I buried too many people who didn't deserve it," he said at last. "I'm not adding you to the list." She exhaled slowly, as if she'd been holding her breath for hours. "What's your name?" she asked. He hesitated, as if the syllables had to be dusted off. "Elijah." "Elijah," she echoed. "I'm Claire." The names hung there like smoke rings, not permanent, but offered. That night passed in stillness. Claire ate a few spoonfuls of stew, though the movement cost her. Elijah remained nearby, but never too close. He brought her water, stirred the fire, checked her wound without asking. She didn't resist him. She didn't thank him, either. Gratitude felt too small for the scale of the thing he had done. Carried her, stitched her, kept her safe without condition. As darkness fell, the trees outside turned to silhouettes. Wind moved like a long breath through the pines, and somewhere beyond them wolves cried to one another, sharp and lonesome. Claire lay awake, eyes open in the dim light. Elijah sat beside the stove, whittling something, a piece of pine shaving down into something smoother. He wasn't a man who filled silence just to keep company. His quiet was not the kind that had cruelty, but the kind that knew words were heavy things and ought to be spent wisely. She spoke softly. "You said too many people who didn't deserve it." "Who?" His knife paused mid-carve. "My brother," he said, "killed in a border raid. Wrong time, wrong town." She waited, letting him unfold it on his own. "I rode in too late, just in time to bury him and hold the piece of land he left behind. That why you live out here?" He nodded. "Noise doesn't reach this far, and I don't go looking for trouble. You found me. I didn't go looking." She smiled faintly, then drifted back into sleep. Elijah stood slowly, walked to the window and peered out. The moon was rising, low and red, casting long shadows across the clearing. Something about the light unsettled him. He couldn't name it. A tension, a shift from the woods, a distant snapping of twigs. Faint. Could have been deer. Could have been something else. He stayed there, watching. Behind him, the woman who had bled half her life into his hands now slept in his bed. And outside, the world kept turning, impatient, unsympathetic, and never still for long. He placed another log on the fire, let it catch, then returned to the chair beside her and set his rifle gently against the wall, just in case. Not because he feared her presence, but because he feared what might be coming for it. In the orange light, Claire breathed softly. Her hair spread across the pillow like wind-blown grass. And for the first time in many years, Elijah felt the shape of a life not haunted by silence, but maybe built on it. The fire crackled. The stars rose. And tomorrow waited, already stirring. The river appeared at first like a scar stitched into the land, narrow, glinting, half hidden beneath a canopy of cottonwoods whose roots clung to the banks like fingers gripping memory. Elijah and Claire had ridden in silence for most of the morning, the only sound the crunch of hooves over dry underbrush and the occasional creak of saddle leather. The trail, if it could be called that, sloped through rock and low brush, narrowing often until they had to ride single file along a ridge that offered no protection but shadows and a view too wide for comfort. Claire rode ahead now, wrapped in a shawl that clung to her like a second skin, her back straighter than the pain in her side should have allowed. She'd said little since they'd left the cabin before dawn. Elijah hadn't pressed her. He recognized the kind of silence she wore, not one born of stubbornness, but careful preservation, like a fire protected from wind. It was the quiet of someone who'd carried truth too long alone. They reached the river by midday. Elijah led them down a rocky incline to a place where the water slowed into a bend, shallow enough to wade across, but clear enough to show the stones beneath. Cottonwoods leaned toward their reflections, their yellowing leaves trembling with every breeze that passed through the valley. The sound of the water was constant but gentle, like breath against skin. Claire dismounted without waiting for help. Her knees buckled slightly when her boots hit the ground, but she caught herself, refusing the arm Elijah half raised in her direction. He watched her cross to the edge of the river and crouch, fingers dipping into the current as if reacquainting themselves with something sacred. Her face softened, not with relief exactly, but something quieter, a kind of recognition, as though the water had been waiting for her too. "This is where it begins," she said, voice almost lost beneath the murmuring flow. Elijah stepped beside her, gazing down at the ripple that caught their shadows and stretched them. "You sure?" She reached into her satchel, pulled out the folded parchment, and laid it gently on a flat rock. Kneeling beside it, she unwrapped the oilskin with care, revealing the map her father had drawn. Even stained, the lines were precise, contours of the land rendered by memory and instinct, marks that no government surveyor had ever dared trace. She ran her fingers along the faded ink, pausing where two intersecting ridges formed a subtle X beside a drawn symbol for flowing water. "This," she said, "is the river under rock. It's not on any map, but his underground flow that surfaces just for a moment here, then vanishes beneath the hills again. If we follow its bend west, it resurfaces miles away. It used to feed a spring that could water a whole valley." Elijah crouched to study the map. "Used to. The spring dried up years ago. Folks thought it was gone. But my father said it was blocked, diverted, maybe deliberately. This river is the only proof that something still moves beneath. And you think this is why they came after you?" She looked up at him, eyes hard and sure. "They want to own the land above it. Build wells, lease water rights. Drain it dry and sell it back to the same towns it once fed." Elijah's jaw tightened. The kind of theft she described was quiet, bloodless on paper, but devastating all the same. He knew what it meant to lose water in a place that had none to spare. Claire sat back, folding the map again with care. "If we follow it and prove it's still alive, I can take it to the old pueblos east of the ridge. They'll protect it. They remember my father. They knew what he was trying to do. You trust them?" "I have to. There's no law that'll save this land. Not one that hasn't already been bought." Elijah didn't reply. The leaves above them rustled, as though answering for him. Trust, once broken, took longer to mend than bodies. Claire turned to him then, and something in her softened. "Why did you really come with me?" He stared at the river a long while before answering. "Because it was right, and because I couldn't stand the thought of you finishing this alone." Her eyes didn't waver. "You've lost people too." He nodded once. "Brother?" "Older." "Younger." She didn't ask how. She didn't have to. It was written in the set of his shoulders, in the way he looked at the land like it might betray him at any moment. "I'm sorry," she said again, quieter this time. He gave a small nod, then rose. "We should follow it west before light starts to fade." They rode slow along the river's curve, weaving through trees and thorn brush, the sound of the water constant, but now distant beneath the hush of gathering wind. As they climbed a rocky bluff that gave them a better view of the land beyond, Elijah spotted something on the ridge behind them, just a flicker a movement out of place. He paused, letting Claire ride ahead. "What is it?" she asked when he caught up. "Thought I saw something. Might have been nothing. Might have been someone." He didn't reply, but a revolver he'd slung loosely before now rested in the saddle holster within reach. By twilight, they found a clearing nestled in a basin where the river widened again. Here, they made camp, small fire, low smoke, with trees gathered close like old friends. Claire leaned back against her saddle, legs stretched, face warmed by the flicker of flame. Elijah sat across from her, one knee up, watching shadows shift. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, "if your life could have gone differently, if you'd made one other choice?" He didn't look away from a fire. "I used to. And now I think maybe brought me here." Claire said nothing, but the fire lit her features with a kind of softness she hadn't worn before. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a compass. Small, scratched, the glass chipped at the edge. "My father gave me this the day before he died. Said it wouldn't always point north, but it would remind me of where I'd been." Elijah looked at it, then at her. "And where have you been?" She smiled faintly. "Everywhere I didn't belong. Until now." He met her eyes then, and for a moment the night felt suspended. Not heavy, not dangerous, just still. The wind picked up again, pulling at the fire's edges. A branch snapped in the distance, too sharp to be coincidence. Elijah rose slowly, eyes scanning the dark. "We're not alone." Claire stood as well, slipping the compass back into her coat. "How far?" He shook his head. "Can't tell, but they're behind us, moving careful. Then we don't sleep." He nodded. "We ride at first light." They doused the fire until it smoldered cold. Wrapped in their coats, they sat near each other but didn't speak. The map was tucked close to Claire's chest. Elijah's hand never strayed far from his sidearm. They watched the stars move overhead in long, patient arcs, and beneath it all, the river whispered on, carving its path into bones of the earth. By the time morning broke, both were already in the saddle. The trail ahead narrowed again, disappearing into hills where the land had grown suspicious of strangers. Behind them, a shape moved at the tree-line, then vanished there, then gone. Claire did not look back. Neither did Elijah. They reached a rise just as the sun slipped free of the horizon, an orange disk cracking through the ridge like a promise made visible. Light spilled slow over the land, catching the river below, turning its silver skin to gold. It flowed from the rocks like breath, emerging where none should be, between layers of shale and limestone. Claire reined in her mare and stared down in silence, lips parted but saying nothing. The spring was real. Below them, a cradle of green unfurled in quiet defiance of the dry-boned earth surrounding it. Cottonwoods clustered near the banks, and wild rye bent under the hush of morning. Birds called from somewhere near the water, cutting the stillness with soft, jubilant notes. It was not a large place, but it was living, and in a land that had learned to expect ruin, life was revolution. Claire dismounted first, boots crunching over gravel as she stepped toward the edge of the slope. The pain in her side was still there, dulled by days in the saddle, numbed by need. Elijah followed, his rifle slung across his shoulder, his eyes not yet on the water but on the hills behind them. "Doesn't look touched," she said. "Not yet," he answered. She took a slow step down the incline, then another, until she reached the narrow channel where the river surfaced, shallow and clear. Kneeling, she dipped her hands into it and brought water to her face. It tasted like stone and memory. Her father's voice, long since gone, stirred inside her like wind through tall grass. Elijah watched her from where he stood, silent as always. He had seen many things in his life. Fires that erased towns, hunger that made men into ghosts, but had never seen someone protect a dream with so much quiet fury. Claire wasn't loud. She wasn't proud, but she carried that map as if it were stitched into her ribs. And now, standing in the golden hush of morning, he saw her become a thing her father must have always known she'd be, the keeper of something sacred. She turned toward him, water drying on her cheeks like tears she hadn't shed. "We'll mark it," she said. "Take readings. I'll copy the map again, one for Pueblos, one hidden. This spring won't belong to men who only see its price." He nodded. I'll help you dig markers. Set stones. But as they set to work, marking ridgelines, noting the elevation, recording the sound the waters bend, something shifted in the wind. Elijah froze. His body tightened in that way it had just before danger surfaced. Claire felt it too, saw it in the stillness that fell across his face. Riders, he said quietly. They didn't need to ask how many. The answer arrived on the breeze, hooves on dry stone, distant but steady. At least 3, maybe more, coming from the north. Claire rose slowly. They followed us. They always were. She moved toward her mare, pulling the map from her coat and tucking it deep into the saddlebag. Her hands didn't tremble, but her breath shortened. Elijah stepped between her and the ridge. Get to cover, behind the bluff near the cottonwoods. Stay low. Wait for me to draw them off. No, she said, voice firm. I'm not leaving you. You're not leaving the spring. That's not the same thing. She hesitated, searching his eyes. You could run. I won't. Why not? He didn't answer. Instead, he pressed the rifle into her hands. You're a better shot than you let on, he said. If they come from both sides, I'll need you steady. She nodded, wordless, then slipped through the underbrush toward the grove. Elijah stayed near the bend, placing himself in plain sight, one figure alone against the backdrop of sky and river. The first rider crested the hill minutes later, silhouetted in the dawn like something drawn in charcoal and smoke. Behind him came 2 more, faces half covered with scarves, rifles slung ready. One of them, Elijah recognized. Square jaw, scarred lip, the one who had led the ambush at the Stagecoach road. Where's the girl? The leader called out, voice too casual. Elijah didn't flinch. She's not yours. We don't want her. Just what she's carrying. She's carrying a wound and a name you won't tarnish. The lead man chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You always been this noble stranger? Or just playing the fool? I buried better men than you for less. One of the riders lifted his rifle, but the leader held up a hand. We take it the easy way, boys. Nobody has to die today. Elijah shifted, boots planted. You already tried to let her die. That offer passed. The standoff breathed for a second. Then bullets cracked the air. Elijah rolled left, behind a boulder, returning fire with calm precision. His first shot struck one rider's horse, sending it shrieking into a run. The man fell hard, rifle spinning from his grip. Claire, from her hiding place, saw it all. She pulled her revolver, aimed through the narrow gap in the cottonwoods, and fired twice. Both shots hitting near the second rider, who ducked and cursed, now split from the others. The spring echoed with gunfire. Birds scattered into sky, the river carrying spent shells in its current. Claire moved low, circling to higher ground, her side burning with each breath, but her hand steady. She'd learned to shoot before she'd learned to dance. Elijah found cover behind a rock shelf and waited, breath measured. One rider tried to flank him, young, nervous, unsure of his path, and Elijah put a shot clean through his shoulder. He dropped his weapon and howled. Enough, the lead man shouted, voice cracking now. We'll burn this place if we have to. Claire stepped into view then, her revolver raised, face set like stone. You'll have to kill us both, and you'll still never find it. The man stared at her, sweat gleaming on his brow. He saw something there, maybe not fear, maybe not even defiance, but conviction, and he understood, finally, that he had misjudged her. She was not the wounded girl they had left to bleed. She was the map now, and the river, and every breath the desert still had left to give. He backed away, spat once into the dust. This isn't over, he said. Claire answered, calm as dawn. For you it is. They rode off in silence, their horses stumbling down the ridge. Elijah didn't lower his rifle until there were specks on the trail, swallowed by sunlight. Later, they buried the shells, erased tracks, and set stones to mark what mattered. The river ran beside them, indifferent but steady. Claire copied the map again, hands ink-stained, heart full. They slept by the water that night, beneath stars born before time had names. Elijah lay awake, listening to wind. Claire slept with her palm resting on the saddlebag, the map safe beneath it. When morning came, they did not speak of what might come next, not of who might follow, not of towns or law, or the price of what they'd kept safe. Instead, Claire knelt once more beside the spring. She cupped water into her hands, sipped, then held out to Elijah. He drank. She smiled, quiet and full. Now you belong to it too. He looked at her, and in her face found something he hadn't known he'd been searching for. Not an ending, a beginning, and the river kept running. If you felt the dust, the danger, and the heartbeat beneath the silence, subscribe for more tales from the Wild West that stay with you long after the fire dies.